welcome to the Future Champions webinar. I'm Stuart Taylor from Intent Sport, and I'll be your host for this sports webinar with Chris Latham. Chris Latham is one of the greatest rugby union players to wear the Wallabies and the Queensland Reds jerseys. He's represented Australia 78 times. He's the second highest goal scorer in Wallaby history. And after retiring from rugby union, Chris moved into coaching. He moved to Japan and was the assistant coach for the Docomo Red Dragons. He then took on the role of assistant coach for the Samoan national side. And this year, he accepted the position of head coach for the Utah Warriors in the USA. Chris Latham, welcome.
Thanks, Stuart. And obviously, thank you to everyone that's joined us. I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's a fantastic initiative. I think it's something, especially in the topics that we're speaking about today, given the amount of investment and the amount of time that you spend on personal skills, when you really look at it, how much time do you really invest in the mental side of your game? And it probably pays just as much, if not a bigger part of your performance. So really looking forward to today's chat.
So Chris, before we start on the actual topic, can you tell us about your move to the United States of America and your role in coaching the Utah Warriors?
Yeah, well, the opportunity came up kind of a last minute. I was pretty much at the getting close to the end of the World Cup tournament with Samoa, and someone scouted me out to see if I would be interested in moving to the States. And then once those conversations went a little bit further, it was for a head coaching role. And to be honest, I'd always, when playing, had in my mind how I'd like to run my own team or have a team under me run. And obviously over the years, those kind of thoughts and processes have changed and evolved. So, obviously this was a great opportunity for me to evolve, for me to grow as a coach. It certainly has put me in my uncomfortable zone, which I enjoy being in. It's certainly a place that at the time it can become very stressful, but as I've learned, the more uncomfortable you are, the better you grow and the better you become. So it certainly has put me in that position, but it's one that I've really enjoyed, and it's those opportunities I see as my continual growth in this sport.
So you're obviously not in the United States at the moment. You're back home in Australia because of the coronavirus issue and the pandemic we're all facing. Can you tell me how you're connecting with your players and how you're keeping them motivated, and also your coaching staff?
Pretty much like we're doing today. I've had two meetings exactly like this morning with myself and my team in America. And again, obviously given the time zones, a lot of my work's either done very early in the morning or very late at night, working with their time zones. But exactly like this, it's basically around making sure that we continue to grow in all areas and businesses as usual as much as possible. And probably the biggest challenge that I have at the moment is obviously the players and their willingness and wanting to do as much as they possibly can, knowing that they're not doing as much as they should be doing. But given the fact of what we're all facing and the limitations, it's making sure that they stay mentally switched on and mentally attuned to what's required.
Excellent. Well, let's get started. But before we do, I just want to explain how the webinar will be run. Today's topic is about being mind tough. And as we go through the topic, we'll ask some questions of the participants or the people that are listening, and you'll have the opportunity to respond through an online poll. It'll pop up on your screen, and your job is to answer it as quickly as possible. There is no right and wrong answers in this poll. It's just to give us some insight into what you're thinking as athletes. You'll have the opportunity to ask Chris some questions as well. If they're about the topic he's talking on, I will stop him and ask him those questions while we're talking about them. If they're about general topics for Chris, we'll save them for the end and I'll ask him about those questions during the end question and answer section. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible, but if there's not enough time, we'll have to leave some. And when we ask you a question, it'll pop up on the screen. You can see the example of the first poll about dealing with pressure. This is an example, so don't try and click on it just yet. The second image shows that when you click on an answer, the submit button turns blue. You've got to press that submit button for us to get your answer to come through. Sometimes technology doesn't like me and the poll won't pop up straight away. That's okay. When that happens, I'll relaunch it and it should pop up on your screen. In relation to questions and answers, if you see here on your screen, at the bottom of the screen, you should see some icons on the device you're using, whether it be a computer or a smartphone or a smart device. The first one is raising your hand, so don't worry about this one, although I know that at some point someone's going to press it regardless. The second one is to chat. If you have a technical issue or a concern, or I think as Martin Doherty just sent me a message asking me about the Celtic strip on the back there. That's a good observation there, Martin. The third icon is the important one. It's to ask a question. You can click on this button. The second screen will pop up and you can see the second screen there where it says welcome, and up the top right hand side you can press on that link which says ask a question, and you can see there I've asked the question. How do I ask a question? You press send and then it will come through and we can have those questions answered by Chris. It's that easy. So Chris, we'll jump straight into it and I'll just give a bit of a background for people who are listening. In the most simple form, an athlete's performance can be broken up into 4 parts. This is the starting of it. It's not the exhaustive list, but it's a good way to start to think about you as an athlete. First is body, and it's often referred to physicality. This is the athlete's physical presence, endurance, speed, and agility. Then there's the doing. That's the technique and skill. And for each sport, it's very different. Then we have thinking about doing. Do you understand your sport and your role in it? What's your game plan? We often refer to this as tactics. People with good game awareness see the game unfold before it happens. Then there is thinking, and that's the area that Chris is going to be talking about today. Confidence, focus, composure, intensity, and trust. If we can improve these areas, we can improve athletic performance. If you score high in these areas, you become mind tough. And when we look at the concept of thinking, one of the tools of that psychology is becoming mind tough. Chris, from your perspective, how important was being mind tough or having mind toughness in your career?
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, if you, again, like I alluded to briefly at the start, if you look at how much time a professional athlete, for instance, will spend on their body physically, so the amount of time on gym, weights, stretching, recovery, and then the amount of time spent on field, whether it's whatever sport you're in, rugby, football, athletics, the amount of time you actually spend on time trying to improve is a hell of a lot of time and a lot of effort. Yet go back and think about, just for yourselves as individuals, how much time you actually spend on how you mentally prepare for games and how you mentally prepare for trainings and how you mentally prepare yourself every day to make sure that you can tick off, I guess, the things that you need to make sure you do, both in a physical and mental state. And I'm sure a lot of those answers would be very little time. Yet for me, once I had the physical attributes to be able to compete with the opposition, it was more then about how I mentally prepared myself to whether or not I was going to be a success week in and week out. And then even on a daily basis, whether or not I'd walk off a training field knowing that I'd been successful in improving myself, and then obviously what I gave to the team and how I improved the team with my performances at training as well, all came down to how well I mentally prepared myself for those things. So again, I think it plays a massive part, a part that I think is becoming more and more relevant in today's society and in today's rugby. But I think I certainly think we need to be spending more time on this.
So, Chris, we've talked about this before, but we've defined mental strength into 5 areas, and they are how we deal with pressure, problems, and mistakes, and also how you perform at training, and at games in competition. I want to go to our first poll question, and let's see if we can get this right. Okay, so the first poll should be about pressure.
Yep.
And the question is, and it should have popped up on your screen, where do you feel the most pressure? In competition, before competition, after competition, or in training? And while we're there, Chris, we have had a question from, our first question was from Kevin, and he said, what was your first trial for representative team when you were younger? Were you stressed, and how did you deal with it? I think that's a good question.
Yeah, very good question. My first representative, I was playing what I call soccer, but obviously for those that are in the game, football these days. I was playing soccer, and I was, I think it was, the first time I actually can remember feeling real pressure was when I played schoolboy selections, and I was a young country kid, and I'd never really, for me, soccer was all about just getting out there and having a bit of fun. I'd never really seen it as a competition, or I'd never really seen it as much moving forward until that day. And I must admit, the pressure got too much for me, and I was more caught up in what I wasn't doing right as opposed to what I needed to do. And that was a very quick learning curve for me, which, to be honest, now looking back, I can see it more irrelevant to the way I handled myself. But at the time, I didn't really process it, nor did I have the people around me that could help me process it. So I was about 16 or 17 years old when I trialed for that, and I certainly I was certainly overwhelmed by the occasion, and subsequently failed quite badly at it. So thankfully rugby came along. Okay,
so we do have a number of, not everyone's responded yet, but we'll have to end the poll. Interesting for me, it's actually different to what I thought it would be, but if you can see this, Chris, and I'll just put it up there. It was interesting that the 0.2 before competition got 78%. So majority of people indicated that it wasn't, about 22% was in competition, and about 78% said before competition was when they felt the most pressure. What's your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. If you would have asked me before, I would have said before competition, to be honest. I guess that's where an athlete starts to think about all the possible outcomes of the game coming up. Most people in competition, well, for me anyway, in my experience, most players or athletes in competition, are really focused on that minute and on the occasion that's going on. Whereas before competition, you have that time and your mind starts to play tricks on you. And again, we'll go through as we go through the list that we've got there of dealing with mental pressure. But it's really making sure that you focus on what's required to be successful. It'll always come into your mind, but what happens if this happens? And what happens if I don't do this? Or, if you're a rugby player, what happens if I miss tackles? Or what happens if I drop the ball? All those negatives will always start to creep into your mind. And again, for me, it comes back to not being able to, not cutting corners in your preparation. If you don't cut corners in your preparation, you know that you have physically prepared yourself right. You physically know that you are confident within how you've prepared. And if you're confidently prepared well, then you can answer those questions yourself in your mind that, no, I'm definitely not going to be going in there missing tackles, because I know I've made my 20 tackles during the week, and I know that my technique's right. I know that I'm putting my head or my shoulders in the right position, and I know that I'm physically up for this challenge. Similar with the ball, I've trained well with the ball in hand. I've done my extra skill sessions. I've prepared myself to know that, I've got to watch the ball into my hands first, and things like that. So again, it's how you it's how you prepare yourself through the week. And like I said, it's making sure that you don't cut corners. You don't think, oh, I'll look at it tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and, oh, I can't be bothered today because I've got to do this or I've got to do that, and I start making excuses before long. You get to that just before competition, and you start to think, the mind plays tricks, and you start to think, oh, I haven't touched on my kicking, or I haven't done enough footwork yet, or I haven't done this, or I haven't done that. And that's when the doubt starts to come in. That's when the questions start to arise. And that's when you start playing the game well before the game starts. And then mentally you go into the game mentally fatigued.
What strategies did you have for dealing with that mental fatigue before a game and trying to reduce the amount of pressure, particularly in the big games?
Yeah, I had my own personal list. I made a list of things that I knew were non-negotiables, things that I knew that I had to make sure that I ticked off to be confident. If I was confident that I'd done all these lists on the list, then I knew that I wouldn't have those self-doubt questions. And, you know, as you move on through your career, that list either grows or the list changes. But I'll guarantee you the list will always grow. The further you get on in your career, the bigger the list gets. But just that list starts to change during your career, depending on obviously age, ability, and who you're up against. Again, though, it's one of those areas. Once you have those lists, you've got to then set yourself out a timeline, and a timeline through the week on when's best to do those things. So obviously, if you've just played a game, you don't want to be going in early in the week working on the more physical side of things, because you need to recover, you need to get yourself physically right, but then also you need to make sure that mentally you're doing the things you need to do. And then once you get that recovery and your mental side of it's done, then you start to get into the physical side of it and ticking off those things. So then later in the week, mentally, you don't have those self-doubt questions.
Can you give an example of when pressure impacted negatively on your performance as an athlete?
Usually the times where I felt the most pressure on my own performances. So if I'd had, again, if there was media around me and my performances, if I knew within myself that I wasn't playing as well, or if I had, injuries that weren't enabling me to be able to physically do what I normally could do at that high pressure times. I mean, the difference between doing something to its fullest and not is usually only 1 or 2% feeling different within yourself, and that can make a huge difference on the outcome. So, having small niggly injuries that you knew in the forefront of your mind that were holding you back, but it's times like those, and again, it's times like those that becomes another list. It's making sure you tick off the recovery side of things. You're going to the physio, you're going to the massages. You're in the gym and you're still getting those physical add-ons that you need to do from that point of view, and then getting onto the pitch and making sure that you can get as much as you can in your preparation regarding to injuries or whatever it is. But mainly those things, those 4 things really impacted, especially me in the early days. I certainly learned that the more that my career went on, the more I learned to shut out media, the more I learned to shut out external pressures, and really relied on having a really strong, honest mentoring group around me that I could trust in and confide in when I was really feeling the pressure.
So that leads us to problems and mistakes, and our next poll question. And I will try my hardest to launch this poll correctly. And there's a number of questions, but what bothers you the most is effectively the question. And let me just see if that poll launched. And
there it is.
There we go. What bothers you the most? And there's a number of them. So what can't you let go in a game is the question. And Chris, while we are there, there's another question. And it says, it's from Zach, and he says, I'm a footballer and a really good goal scorer, but when I play a game and have a really bad shot, it affects me for the rest of the game and I end up having a poor game. How can I fix this? This is obviously a common problem in athletes. How can Zach fix this?
Well, Zach, I pretty much would guarantee that every athlete goes through this. And I guess you've got to start to realize within yourself that that shot's gone. That shot's missed. You can't bring it back. You can't replay it. You can't have it again. So you've got to just forget about it. You've got to learn to quickly realize, the mind's a funny thing. The mind wants answers, and the mind will keep searching for answers until you give it an answer. So for me, when I made mistakes, I quickly learned that if I can quickly identify why I made a mistake. So for your instance, why did you miss the shot? As a footballer, did you lift your head when shooting, which obviously either makes the ball, either you hit the top of the ball because you've lifted your head, or you've hit too far below the ball and the ball's gone over? Did you kick across yourself, which made the ball go across the goal? Or did you underkick it, which made it go in, the opposite way? So again, you need to quickly identify those areas. Once you've made that decision, move on, move to the next thing. Because if you don't move on, you will continually have bad games and won't be able to move past those mistakes. So again, find solutions. And the best way to do that is obviously at training. When you're at training and you miss a goal, quickly tell yourself, why did I miss it? Bang. Okay, let's go. Next one, next job. And as you'll find, as you get better and better at doing those things, you'll start to learn that you're fixing problems quickly on the move. But not only that, you're moving on from problems as well. Great question.
It is a good question, and we are going to end this poll. And let's see how we go. We'll share the results. Interesting that, and can you see those? You'll see that the number one is mistakes you make, so that make personally. But you can also see bad referee decisions. There's most people. There's at least an answer for each one of those. Comments from a teammate, comments from a coach. There's a lot in there, isn't there, Chris? And I guess it's understanding how to deal with those things that you can't let go in the game and playing in the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, out of my 16 years of playing professional rugby, and now I think it's 8 years of coaching, I've never seen a referee change their ruling, nor has there ever been a change in the ruling of any sport that I've ever watched, to be honest. So you can't get caught up in the referee, as much as I still get a little bit caught up with it, well, a lot as a coach. There are obviously areas that I still work on, but again, it's never going to change things. So you need to move on. You've got to realize that comments from coaches want the best from you. The coaches want you to be successful. So any comment a coach makes is generally for the better of your performance. If you feel that it's not, well, then again, you just need to block it, move on, and then deal with it after the game, not dwell on it. But again, the quicker that you can find solutions to mistakes or solutions to things that don't go well and deal with those and move on, the better off you'll be as an athlete. So
Will Allen has asked a question. How did you deal with setbacks, injuries and selections at junior and senior level?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's certainly difficult when you're in the professional era of a sport that you read about it. You read about yourself and you read about the disappointments in the paper. Sometimes you read about them before you even know about them, which is even better. But again, you know, that's where it's really important that you are physically and mentally strong. You have a good team of mentors around there that you can trust. And I was very lucky. I had a guy named Alec Evans who was a mentor of mine. And, you know, whenever I got dropped, which to be honest, I got dropped a lot, you know, I would confide in him, and, you know, I would tell him the reasons if I was given a reason why I was dropped, and he would tell me whether or not he thought it was warranted or not. And, you know, if it was warranted, I'd then search for solutions on making sure that, I made myself better and I worked harder at training. Every time I got dropped would mean I'd just, I'd kick cans and be really disappointed I'd give myself a 12-hour window of where I would make sure that before I went to bed or by the time I woke up the next morning, I was in a more positive mind and I had a direction in which I needed to go to be successful again.
And I guess from that perspective, when we talk about mentors, they do help you to see what's important now. The acronym we've got up there about WIN, what's important now, and also help you to see the big picture.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as an athlete, you can get really caught in your own little bubble, and it's very difficult when you're in your own little bubble to see the big picture. And as has been said, having a mentor or a group of mentors that you trust and that are going to be honest with you, they have that view of sitting above everything and having a view of everything. And, once you've been given that big picture, the solutions become very, very easy and become very, they become very easy to see. And once you've got those issues worked out, it becomes a very simple process of making sure you can tick off those steps, I guess, you need to do to build that confidence back up and to get your performances to where you need them to be.
And the other area, and it seemed to be a lot of the responses were more about mistakes from teammates and mistakes from others. You've talked before on the Future Champions podcast about being in the moment. And can you explain or living in the present and focusing on the now, what that means as far as an athlete and dealing with mistakes?
Yep. So again, as a coach now, and I was a lot like this as a player. Mistakes are inevitable in any sport or any as an athlete, and I seem to think the more mistakes you make, positive mistakes, and when I say positive mistakes where you have intent to try and improve, intent to try and make things better for the people around you. If you're making those mistakes, then you can only learn. If you're smart enough, you can only learn from those. So they're not really mistakes. But like I've said before, you need to make sure that when you do make those mistakes, that you have quick solutions. You need to quickly realize, why did I make that mistake? Why did that happen? Okay, that's why. Righto, move on to the now. If you focus on the past, you're just going to dwell. You're going to miss the next opportunity to either improve, or you're going to miss the next opportunity to make the most of that to be in a positive position for yourself and for the team. So again, we can get really trapped in the past and get brought down and bogged down with, dwelling on, oh, I missed that goal, or I missed that kick, or I missed that tackle. And you keep dwelling on you doing that. I think we need to start changing athletes' focus on not to, oh, that's happened, as to how can I quickly fix it? Why did it happen? That's why, righto, bang, now I'm on to the next moment. And as soon as I start living in the moment, that's the time great athletes and great performers can you really see the difference between an athlete and a great athlete, is they're able to move on and start focusing on the now.
So talking about moving on to the now, we talk about competition and training. And our next poll question relates to how we perform in competition and training. The question is, when is your energy at its highest? Another word for energy, and we're just using energy in the simplest term, is intensity. And there are two potential answers. Is it highest in competition or game, or is it higher in training? So we'll ask that question now, and let me just see if it works. And
perfectly.
And while we're doing that, there's another question. This one's from Ali, and she wants to know, when did you first represent Australia? Were you nervous?
It was 1998, and it was in Stade de Francais Stadium in France. The stadium had been purposely built the year before for the Soccer World Cup. So it was a massive stadium. It was a sellout. It was my first test. Was I nervous? To be honest, no. I was playing outside a centre, as I'm pretty sure you'll all know, as a Wallaby great, Tim Horan. And Tim Horan said to me early in the week, he said, train like you normally have been training, and make sure that when you get out onto the field, you run out, you take 5 seconds to yourself to circle the stadium, look at everyone in there, take a deep breath, and then before you know it, the game will be over. So during the week, I obviously trained how I'd normally train and do all the things that I normally did. I must admit, just before I ran out, I did start to get a little bit nervous, but with everything and the speed of what everything happens once you get to a stadium, everything moves quite quickly. You're in, you get changed, you're out for the warm-up, you're back in again, and before long, you're back out again for the anthems and for the start of the game. So I did exactly as Tim said, and I took 5 seconds to soak in the atmosphere, look around. Next minute, the kickoff happened. And then it was like a blink of an eye, and the whistle had gone, and the game had finished. I was actually more nervous in my second test during the week, because I actually had a taste of it, a taste of test match rugby, and I had a taste for what I really loved about the game and what I really enjoyed, and I didn't want to ever let that go after that first test. So it became something that I never wanted to lose. So I was more nervous on my second test than my first.
Well, I think we've reached the end of that poll, and it's not surprising. For me, it's not surprising that, if we can see that, by far people's energy levels are at the highest at competition or game. My question, Chris, to you is, it seems like a straightforward question, but it's not that straightforward, is it? You've often talked about what level of intensity or energy you need at training on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, and compared to the game. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me, actually, that result. And for me as a coach, and for me as the back end of my career, is I realised I needed the more energy I put into my preparation during the week, and the higher the intensity in which I trained at as a player, and the higher intensity that I like the teams that I coach to train at, outweigh the improvements that you get from players, as opposed to training at a lower intensity and then trying to get that out of them in a game. So in summary of all that is the higher the intensity that you can train at, the higher the skill that you're going to possess during training will mean that when you get to games, because you've trained at a higher intensity during the week, if you can train at a higher intensity in what games are normally played at, then it means once you get to games, they become easier. And a good instance of that is if you look across any sport and you look at the greatest player that's ever played your sport, everyone will always say they seem to have the most time. They seem to float, or they seem to do it at ease. That's because they had the intensity of the game, or the pace of the game was running at a lot slower than what their mind and their body are used to training at. And again, that's something that as a coach, I try to coach the players and the athletes to try and get them to understand that if we can really lift that intensity of training to a higher level than what the game will ever be, and we get used to that, and we get comfortable in dealing with the mental pressures of that and the physical pressures of training at such a high intensity, then game competitions become a lot easier.
So just recapping on those 5 areas, did you want to give a summary of what it means to be mind tough in those, and using those, ways of dealing with problems, pressure and mistakes, and how you, train and compete?
Yeah. So just a quick summary of, being mind tough in the pressure zone. Pressures normally come from the mind second guessing how you've prepared. So if you've made sure that you've got your list of what you need to do to be able to perform, and you tick off those things during the week, then generally those type of questions don't get thrown back at yourself in your mind. If they do, you can easily start to answer. Like I said before, the mind wants answers. And if you can quickly give that an answer, then it'll move on, and then you'll be able to, you won't be finding yourself mentally fatiguing yourself. As far as problems go, again, problems just need answers. If you can quickly get used to giving yourself of answers to those problems. Why did I miss that kick? Why did I miss that tackle? Why aren't I, being able to kick that last 100 meters of a sprint? If you can give yourself those answers, then you're looking at being able to solve quickly on the run, and then you'll be starting to perform a lot better during the games and not getting bogged down. Same as mistakes. Again, if we can figure out those mistakes and problems, they work hand in hand. Like I said, the quicker you can find out why you've made those mistakes, you can start to move on from those. And then obviously the compete and the train, they work hand in hand as well. Again, if you can train at a higher intensity to the way that you play, then playing becomes a lot easier, because again, you've physically and mentally worked harder during the week than what you're ever going to work on the weekend during competition. And once that starts to happen, you're going in fully prepared, mentally switched on, and mentally tough for any situation that comes your way.
So just going on to some questions, Henry Warren asked, how do you get the most out of a training session?
Yeah, well, for me, when the teams that I coach, we really make sure that before going into training, the athletes know exactly what's expected. So they know the drills, they know what outcomes we need to achieve, they know the rules around whatever the training session holds itself, and what skills need to be required. So then once we get out onto the field, there's very little question time, there's very little stoppage. And for me, it's then about training on the move. It's about getting used to solutions on the move, solutions with very little time taken to chat and stop. And between stoppages, whether we're moving from drill to drill, it's about how it basically is in a game. And that is, you usually get about a minute's rest or a 30-second rest. So it's about getting your water, getting your drink, calming down, getting quick solutions on a few issues that are really the common issues. It's not really focusing on the small things. Really concentrating on the big issues, the big issues that are stopping us from moving forward for the future. That might be bogging us down. Once we've got those quick solutions, it's bang, we're straight on to moving quick and fast and not dwelling, not stopping. If they're small individual errors, it's about giving those individuals answers on the run, not stopping the team just to help little Johnny out who might be dropping a couple of balls. And because I'm helping Johnny out, I've stopped 15, 20 or 30 other athletes from improving. It's about helping him quickly whilst the other athletes keep on improving. And whilst we're doing that, yeah, we're training at a higher speed than what the game will ever throw at us. And we're trying to create pressure situations and put as much mental pressure on the athletes as much as possible. So again, whilst they're making calls or whilst they're trying to focus on their job, it's about throwing things at them, verbals or speeding up intensity or, throwing in a third ball or throwing in a bad decision, for instance. So they have to quickly deal with it, have to deal with that intensity and deal with those pressures. So they quickly learn to move on and focus on the now.
That's an interesting comment you make as a coach, that you actually manufacture bad decisions as part of your training.
I get great pleasure out of giving bad decisions and making people blow up, because then, you can really start to get right inside the player or the athlete's mind and get them to focus on the now. And again, we may be playing a game of a drill that only has one ball, and all of a sudden I might just throw in a soccer ball or a frisbee or something that's just going to throw everyone off. And, it's quite interesting at the start that everyone just stops. And if you look at in sport, that's generally what happens when you get bad decisions, is everything stops. And it's amazing and fascinating as soon as they get used to that, how quickly they can just adapt, and they just don't focus on the frisbee or the soccer ball or anything else. They just focus on the job at hand and moving forward.
So Charlie Bennett has said, what do you do when you verse a very good team? I guess, is it different to versing a really bad team?
Well, for mine, I don't ever see a team as being good or bad. I more tend to focus on me or the athletes or the team. So again, for me, when I was an athlete, if I was, for instance, coming up against the All Blacks, it wasn't really me playing the All Blacks. It was me playing myself. It was, what do I need to do to make sure I do my job to the best of its ability for the team? It was never about, I'm coming up against such and such, or we're playing such and such, and they're the best in the world. It was more about what I need to do week out, whether it was the All Blacks or a tier 2 nation team. I didn't care less. I never really focused on the opposition. I really just tried to focus on myself. Obviously, there are times during the week where you're doing your mental preparation on looking at the opposition, seeing where their weaknesses are, seeing where the opportunities may be. Yes, you do all that. But I never really focused on they're a good team or a bad team. I really just focused on where my opportunities lied and what I needed to do to make sure that I made the most of those opportunities if I was given the opportunity.
It was a really good question from Ollie and Finn Hawkins. What was your hardest game or hardest team you've played against? Thanks, from Ollie, Finn Hawkins and Will Bourne.
If I look at it now, my hardest team I ever played was, I guess, the team for me when I got replaced. They were the oppositions that I hated getting replaced on because I wasn't able to contribute anymore. Physically, the hardest team, I guess physically it was either the All Blacks or because you knew you were just in a full 80-minute slog. And then physically, the South Africans, they're big, they're tough, they're strong, and they have a good way of bending the rules to get hold of you. So there was always a physical challenge, a good physical challenge there.
Excellent. Now Harrison has said, I'm a rugby player and want to score tries. How do you make sure you're in the best position to score?
Work rate. Work, and work. Don't stop working. The minute you stop and think, I'll just wait for this opportunity, or I'll wait for the next phase, or I'll wait for the next thing, then you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. You've just got to be on the ball. You've got to be wanting to get your hands on the ball, and you've got to be wanting to put the effort in. I can't count how many endless, I guess I call them cheap tries, where I just, as soon as I knew we had the ball, I was up in that line and I was just following or getting myself in a position, and you'd follow guys through, and to be a 2v1 and you'd be on the end of it and a free run to the line, only because you just worked hard off the ball.
And what is your biggest accomplishment? This is from Ketis. What is your biggest accomplishment in your sporting career, and when did you accomplish it?
Biggest accomplishment would be, I guess, for any athlete, it was when I played my first test for Australia, or got my first cap for Queensland Reds. And then when you get that, you build to, I wanted 50 for Queensland and 50 for Australia. And then I wanted 100 for Queensland. I guess looking back on it now, and you look at the amount of professional athletes that are able to do it, but just have longevity. That's a big accomplishment, to be able to, physically and mentally evolve as the game evolves, stay fresh, stay active in the game, and be able to evolve your game so you can continue to continue to be in the moment. And that's it's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult. So for me now, I've retired playing. It's having that longevity in the game.
And from Ollie Finnegan, and this is a question we have often talked about, Chris, is can country kids have a pathway to the Wallabies in today's professional era? What do you need to do to become a Wallaby as a country kid? And I guess that's a question not only for the Wallabies, but for every sport.
Yeah, I guess, that was my pathway. I was a country kid from northern New South Wales that played a few games locally for my hometown team, and then moved to Sydney and played Colts for Randwick Colts as an under 18, under 19-year-old for 2 years, and then played grade for 2 years. And whilst playing grade for Randwick, first grade for Randwick, I then got into the under 21s for New South Wales and for Australia, and then from there I got into the Super Rugby. So again, that was my pathway. I must admit, the pathway has become a little bit more challenging than what it was, but it's not too dissimilar. But again, you've got to back yourself. You've got to believe in yourself. You've got to train hard. Even those that have the ability, even those that train hard, even those guys or athletes that can and should make it, don't make it. And so it's one of those things that you've just got to make sure that you just keep putting yourself out there, as far as performances, not only on the field game day, but training days as well. And you've just got to keep performing.
So this is an interesting question, probably one that you've had to deal with in your own professional career that probably made the back page of the paper. How did you get over people thinking you were not good enough?
I get that all the time, and I still get it as a coach. I mean, again, it comes back to self-belief, and having the right support around you. There's always going to be, there's always things, I guess for me, for instance, if I wanted to build a rocket ship and I thought I could do it, well, realistically, I couldn't do it. And I've got to have people around me that if I truly believed I could, but yet the right people around me are saying, mate, there's no way on earth you can do it. You've got to have trust in those people. And it's the same in sport. You've got to have the right people around you and the trust to say, righto, what is it that I need to work on now to make sure that I become the best in my position? And, whether you read it in the paper that, Chris Latham's well past his use by date at age 30. There's no way that he's ever going to come back from this. His performances have dropped over the last however many games, years. You're always going to get those people, because at the end of the day, negativity sells, and that's what people want to read. But you've just got to make sure that you fully believe in yourself. You have those people that trust in you and you believe in them with what they're telling you. And, at the end of the day, I played for another 7-8 years because I believed in myself and I worked hard at what I did and improved. So you've just got to have the right network and support and belief in yourself.
So we've got 3 questions that we probably can get through before the end of the session. And this is from John, what's a good training drill to do at your home? And I guess the current situation dictates that a lot of kids will be at home. Can you think of any sort of drills? I guess that's from a rugby perspective. What could you do? Or from a fitness perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're by yourself, obviously with your parents at home, you can work hard on your passing skill. So again, your 1- and 2-handed passing strength drills, getting some sticks or some cones or some rocks from out the backyard or whatever it is, working on your agility and speed, evasion skills. With a football, you can be kicking it up against a wall or a fence, working on your ball drop. Again, there's so many skills, closed skills that can be worked on by yourself that are really relevant to when you get out on the open field. So, for instance, kicking. The main element of a good kick is the ball drop, and you don't need 100 meters or you don't need space to work on your ball drop. a couple of football socks rolled up into a ball, and you can do it inside, working on dropping the pair of socks onto your foot the correct way so it nicely sits perfectly for a strike there. I mean, there's a ton load of drills and things you can be doing. It's a lot easier, though, as an athlete to make excuses than to really sit down and think about breaking down a drill and what you can work on. It's endless.
Another question from Zach. How can you deal with mental fatigue over a 3 to 7 day tournament period, as in being a senior leader, captain, that often finds themselves having a rough period towards the end of the tournament? So I guess that's dealing with tournament football. How do you deal with fatigue?
Yeah, again, it's about mentally being strong enough to be positive. It's very easy to, if, for instance, if performances from a personal level or a team level don't go well, you can get bogged down in that. You can really start to get bogged down in, why isn't this going right? What are we doing wrong? How can I do this? And then as soon as you start doing that, I'll guarantee you, my legs are a little bit sore, my glutes are sore, my shoulders are a little bit sore, I'm tired, and it just starts to roll, and then that mentally starts to take toll on yourself. I think it's really about making sure you stay positive. It's about, especially in a tournament, there's not too much big issues you can fix in a tournament. In a tournament, you can only really fix the small issues, the small things. And you just need to focus on those and stay positive. And the minute you start focusing on the small things and being positive, you'll start to see small positive turnarounds. And it's those small positive turnarounds that actually turn into big things. And it's those things that mentally keep you fresh. It's those things that mentally keep you stimulated. If you focus on the big things, it's very hard in a short time to fix big things. And when you're not seeing improvements and you're not seeing positivity, it's very easy to go back into negative, and negative makes you fatigued.
Okay, just a few quick questions and maybe some quick answers so we can get through before the hour is up. From Samuel Watson, how do you keep good technique for a long period of time and practice it?
Practice makes perfect technique. Again, you just got to make sure, again, it's good to do things by yourself. But I always felt there were times where, even for kicking was a daily focus for me. If I didn't practice on every day, I felt I saw a drop in my skill. And there was times there where I'd practice and never get better and actually get worse. And all I needed was one person, a mentor, to come and look at me. Oh, you're doing this wrong. Bang, all of a sudden, instant fix, and I was back practicing proper technique again. So again, it's a good idea to film yourself, learn to know your technique and what it looks like, and also have someone else there that knows that as well.
How can you, this is from, is it Tama Hodgson? How can a captain help others get over mistakes?
Being positive. A quick tap on the back, or it's all right, mate, let's go, is far better than oh, come on, or why'd you do that for? Because ultimately that doesn't fix the problem. Again, a quick tap on the back, don't worry about it, mate. Next time, if he dropped the ball or she dropped the ball, for instance, it's make sure you keep your eyes on the ball and bring your hands to the ball. Just a quick fix. It may not even be the reason why, but it gives them that mental quick fix in their brain, and then they're ready to go and they're mentally switched on for the next time.
What is the most, and this is from Harrison Fowler, what is the most number of tries you've scored in a game?
It was 4, wasn't it, for that? 4 or 5? 4 or 5, I think it was.
Yep. And what game was that for?
I think it was the one with your jersey behind you, the Namibia.
Was that against Scotland? No, it was
Namibia.
Namibia, yes.
Namibia.
Very good. Now, this one is from Martin, who is a mad Celtic fan, as he indicated before. He says, Christian Stewart, this is a great insight into an athlete and coach who has worked at the very highest level. Thank you. I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but I think it's very important to bring it up. Your interview is based on mental toughness. What one piece of advice would you give to an up-and-coming sports person today?
One bit of advice: get a good, strong network, a support network around you. Don't trust in friends or don't trust in peers. Get a group of people you trust that aren't involved in your social network, because then you really know they've got your best interests at heart.
Fantastic. Look, Chris, thank you. I think we are at the time. I think we've answered all the questions we can. And we've reached the end of our webinar. Chris, thank you very much for volunteering your time.
Not a problem, Stuart. Really enjoyed it. I think it's a fantastic, as has been said, a fantastic initiative, and hopefully I've helped help some athletes along. And
I hope, not only have I enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed it too, Chris, but I hope the listeners have also enjoyed it. Our next webinar will be in a week, and it'll be the same time, same day in 7 days' time. And that will be with former Brisbane Roar player Shane Stefanuto, who is an absolute legend, not only as a person, but as an athlete. If you'd like to listen to Chris Latham's Future Champions podcast that he did a couple of months ago before he left to the USA, you can jump on www.ntentsport.com. Guys, thanks for joining us. And Chris, thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thanks, guys.